Our next lecture looked at the critique of Eurocentric psychology. And we indicated then that the function of Eurocentric psychology, like the function of any Eurocentric discipline, is to maintain the status quo. Is to maintain, of course, European dominance. It doesn't matter whether it's psychology or sociology or economics or mathematics or engineering, whatever it may be, ultimately it is geared to maintaining that status quo. The function, we said, of Eurocentric psychology is to cure our people into sickness. That the very cure itself represents illness. Because if that cure is designed to adjust our people to a system that works against the interests of those people, certainly then becoming adjusted to that system implies then becoming adjusted to oppression, and implies then a certain illness. The psychology and psychotherapy of the European is designed to maintain the social, economic, values relationships. And you can see it even in the relationship itself. White therapist, black patient, white paternalism, same kind of process, white consumerism going on in that therapeutic relationship, white values being projected through the relationship itself again, white man solving black man problem, even often if it's a black man who's doing it. There's still so in the therapeutic process itself is inherent the cultural ideology in and of itself, let alone, of course, the other things that are going on. The function of that psychology, we've learned, is to depoliticize mental illness, to make us think that mental illness is purely a mental problem and not a political problem, not a social problem, not a problem of oppression. To give the individual the impression then that the problem that they're suffering from is merely individual and merely that of personality, and that it is unrelated to the whole of the society in which they find themselves, and to limit then the therapy to the narrow focus of the therapist-client relationship instead of the relationship between European and oppressed. So the therapist, even in their direct relationship, even if it is a black one often, helps to maintain that status quo. So we see then that the Eurocentric psychology is an arm of the state, is a part of the state. And those of us black psychologists and black social workers, we recognize we still, to a great extent, work for the state and for the city. And we have to analyze our relationship very carefully, as well as our relationship to our clients very carefully, to try to subvert the helping to maintain the status quo through our activities. Those of you who are professionals certainly will have to watch that, because many of us use that idea that I am a professional as an excuse not to become humanly concerned and politically concerned with our situation. The European psychological system is designed to aid the European imperialistic system in being more effective psychologically, in being more effective in its psychological warfare. And what a great heritage, and yet people responded to that. Of course, one of the major functions of psychologists is to provide this kind of information. How is it that you fool them? How do you deceive them? What do you say? What you don't say? How should you look? What should you wear? How should you cut your hair? You see, all of these things. You see also Mondale in that last debate there, puffed eyes, dry features. People are responding as much to that as to anything else. How they responded to Nixon's 5 o'clock shadow. All of these things, of course, are advised upon by psychologists and by other people who manipulate the media. Colors of the labels of the food you buy. Everything in one way or another runs through the psychological machinery as a means of manipulating consciousness and as a means of manipulating behavior and as a means of ultimately of supporting the system itself. So then we can see that the Eurocentric psychological establishment is a political establishment, regardless of its pretensions otherwise. We talked about psychoanalysis and attacked its interest in terms of sexual drives and trying to blame all of humans' failings and problems on sexual repression, on intrapsychic mechanisms, on family, and seeing the family as the ultimate destroyer of children. Again, of course, escaping the fact that the family, that sexuality, that even how you think and what you repress is directly related to your social, political situation, and therefore the ultimate ground for the understanding even of the unconscious, even of sexual repression, and even of family destructive behavior must start with an analysis of the political and social structure that surrounds people themselves. And any psychology that focuses in these narrow areas then, in effect, is serving the political system itself. We talked about behavior modification with this valuelessness in its approach, with this technocratic approach, manipulative approach that deals with manipulating behavior instead of empowering people to deal with the system in which they are embedded, that uses social standards as the basis for modifying behavior when those social standards themselves may actually be working against the individual's own goods as well as the goods of our people, that uses rewards that the systems has set up itself to manipulate behavior, that uses symbols to adjust and modify the individual behavior, and that often uses coercion. We have seen then that behavior modification is ultimately conservative in nature. And if we as black psychologists do not expand upon it and use it within the context of black political aims, then again we will conserve the system itself. We talked about the humanistic psychology, that psychology that emphasizes self-indulgence and sees the self merely as the center of the universe, that supports in many people a narcissistic attitude toward life, that points the individual inward, that impresses subjectivity above communal living. That kind of psychology is also conservative. It is concerned with individual salvation and not communal salvation and social salvation. It concerns itself with the changes of perception of reality instead of the reality itself. And therefore then your experience of reality is changed, though the reality itself continues to be the same. What recommendations can we have then coming out of such a system? The psychology must be Afrocentric, obviously. Blacks in the helping profession must be grounded in Afrocentricity. Afrocentric psychology must be consciously political. You must not be ashamed to be political as a psychologist. It must be consciously activist. The black psychologist is not merely an armchair philosopher and merely a statistician running standards experiments. Black psychology is not merely psychology that black people happen to be doing. And that's a very important distinction, because many of us, I've seen some books published called Black Psychology, which is really no different from Eurocentric psychology, and the only difference was it was just black people doing it. But essentially the nature of it, the point of it, was no different from the standard psychology. The black psychologist then is consciously active and must, we said, create rebels. We are saying if our people are oppressed, and a lot of their psychological ills come from their oppression, then an appropriate psychotherapy of our people involves making them rebels against the system that has made them sick in the first place. So that psychology must be educative. It must be educative. Certainly, it has to be community-oriented. We're not going to get anywhere curing and individuals one by one. This is it's just out of, we're going to have to reorient the community itself so that it can reach the broadest number of people and prevent the illness. Often Eurocentric psychology is like police work. It comes after the fact, after you've been robbed. The idea here is, of course, to create a community where this is not allowed to happen to begin with. The psychologists and the social workers and other people then must actively engage in social change. And an Afrocentric psychology must have its own values and not be ashamed to have values, and not to be ashamed to tell its patients that we have some real Afrocentric values, and not go through this pretense that European systems have of saying, well, I'm not imposing my values on you. You see, we must have values. And at the danger of having people wonder about it, we have to do it. But they have values, of course, but there's a pretense that their values are not there. I'm going to, in the light of time, I'm going to go over these, skip something here, and let me just take a look at where we were in our last lecture and try to advance a little something here. That is the relationship between social class and social relations and labor relations and community organization and consciousness. What we are trying to say here then, as we said in our last lecture, that the ideology of the European imperialism is embedded in the very way we relate to each other socially. Right. It's embedded in the way we even work. And it's embedded in the working and labor relations of the society as a whole. It's embedded in our living conditions as well. So you can see then that the living conditions, the labor relations that inherit in the society, the general ways our communities are designed, and the general way information is processed and so forth in society are directly related to the state of consciousness of our people and the organization of our community. And the very organization of a community itself relates to the consciousness of the people as well. And therefore, job discrimination and other forms of discrimination, as we said earlier, is not just a racial discrimination, but it is a consciousness-controlled mechanism and a means of creating people and creating personalities as such. Let's look a bit at the labor situation as far as our black people are concerned. I think you will find it of interest, because if labor does contribute to the nature of our people and productivity, then certainly we have to look at it. I'm going to quote a bit, and I hope you can stick with me a little here, from the State of Black America 1984, published by the National Urban League. And that's just, and here's a thing too that it makes an interesting format as well. You know, we talked about how whites design their textbooks. It becomes interesting to see how these kind of studies are structured as well. How often still the Afrocentric context is still left out, and the political, social context, and the failure to come to terms with European imperialism and Europeans' intentions is not dealt with in these reports, even though they're reports about the state of our people. But often the very means by which our people can get out of the state that we're in is not included there. Of course, it's understandable given the nature of the organization. And given the nature of the fact that our major organizations are dependent upon white funding, you see. And to that extent, we are all responsible. To the extent that we sit around and let these organizations be funded and supported by whites, to that extent, of course, they are going to push white agendas. And that's the nature of the beast, as we say. And again, those of us who are black nationalists, even though we disagree with the goals of these organizations in part, then we're going to have to find our own, or we have to support it in such a way that we can put our own input into them. Let's look at some of the things that are said here. The economic status of black America, it says, is there a recovery? That's an interesting question within itself. Is there recovery, and can there be a recovery? Most Americans have always felt that a job was fundamental. Black Americans have also shared this view. They too traditionally regarded unemployment as a temporary state. It's very interesting too, because you may as well get ready to regard unemployment as a permanent state in America. And there are many reasons. We don't have time to go in here today. But there's not going to be much of a recovery the way things are going here. However, the recession of the 1980s brought an instability to the employment situation that had not existed since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Of course, you see, fitted within the idea that we projected here before, that a major function of Eurocentric society is to destabilize the African personality. This comes as no surprise. And this end, of course, is quite predictable, even from the very beginning, when we were fully employed as slaves. The point, though, ultimately was to unemploy us. Not only did double-digit unemployment become a reality, but many workers found that their unemployment insurance benefits, which they had relied on to carry them through other spells of joblessness, had been exhausted. Additionally, many of them faced the prospect of never returning to their former jobs because their plants had either reduced their workforces or closed down entirely. We don't have time to talk about the deindustrialization of America, but I would advise you to read in that area of America becoming deindustrialized. And you heard Mundell and some of these people talk about the reindustrialization of America. Chances are that reindustrialization will not occur. Millions of jobs are being shipped right out of the American system. Fords and all of these other things, of course, you will see are made in Mexico and other areas. By the first quarter of 1983, unemployment had reached 11.2% overall and 20.6% for blacks. This was in sharp contrast to recessions in 1975 and 1976, when overall unemployment was 8.5 overall and 7.7 respectively. And it goes on. In the interest of time, I just want to make a few indications here. When we turn to the National Urban League's Hidden Unemployment Index, which counts those workers not tabulated in the official Bureau of Labor Statistics, the picture becomes even grimmer. Throughout the first 3 quarters of 1983, this figure for black, that is unemployment, was at or slightly above 33%. That is a tremendous, if that represented a separate nation, that would represent tremendous economic disaster. Because if you measure this against the Great Depression in this country, this is almost twice as many unemployed during that time. So it would represent a devastating economic circumstances. It's just because we are caught in this web that we don't see the degree of economic devastation that the black community is in, and because often the black statistics are buried in the white statistics. But if you saw it as a nation, you would see that this would be the ruination of a nation economically. And it talks about teenage employment. Black teenage unemployment remained at a critical level in 1983. By October 1983, black male teenagers age 18 to 19 had an unemployment rate of 42.7%. And we know, of course, it is higher than that. The rate for white teenagers was 18.3%. And it goes on to talk about for the black teenagers, the October rate was lower than the average monthly rate of 47.4%. If we can take note that from what we can take note is that from 1.2 times the white male unemployment rate in 1955, that is when blacks were sort of at a peak of employment, the black teenage rate is now 2.3 times the white teenage rate, indicating what has happened over time. What we're talking about here, ladies and gentlemen, of course, is that the percentage of black people participating in the labor force has been declining. And for black males has been declining, as indicated here. Let's see, teenage black female participation has remained fairly constant over the past 30 years. It indicates, though, in terms of labor force participation, black teenage male participation, which has been declining over the past 30 years. This has been paralleled also by black male employment. The number of black males employed in this system has decreased percentage-wise as well as absolutely, and seems to be going down even further. They note here, in fact, the private sector, as we shall see in our next section, is not hospitable to black-white income employment parity. On the other hand, the public sector has been the major contributor to black professional employment. What we're saying here, about 70% of our people, black professionals, are employed by governmental agencies. And when the governmental agencies and city agencies cut back on their employment, of course, we will have that black middle class being pushed right down into the poverty level as well. It is interesting to note, they say at the end of the report, that from 1948, when unemployment statistics were first collected by race, black employment did not even approach 14% until 1981. Long-term trends based on data over 30 years can show no relief in sight. This last recession seems to be another nail in the coffin, housing the growing black-white employment differentials, with blacks buried even deeper in this recovery period than they were before the recession started. Have we overcome? So, of course, we can see here then that we are faced, despite what may appear to be a psychologically uplifting situation that's put forth by some of our leaders, with a very dire situation in terms of the well-being of our people as a whole. It means then that we are going to have to bring about some changes in the culture, and some very deep changes. And it means we, even as black nationalists, will have to begin to look at ourselves very closely as well. I mentioned earlier that one of the major changes we are going to have to make is that change in black leadership. We should recognize by now that assimilationist leadership has failed our people. That the kind of leadership that has been before us and led us for the last several decades is bankrupt. That it cannot offer our people anything, and that the promises it made to our people have not been delivered. So consequently then, it is necessary for us to analyze and evaluate that leadership. I'm looking here at a piece done in the Wall Street Journal in 1980, October 29, 1980, called the Minority Report here, when they were doing quite a bit of those. And it says, black politicians fear they can't do much to help their people. What else is new here? They often lack influence, and when they have it, conditions thwart them. Is it better to elect a white? I think some people in Queens can answer that one. Jackie Vaughn, a 42-year-old black Michigan state senator from Detroit, sees himself as an important political force for the black people he represents. The black, the unemployed, the welfare recipients, as he describes them. I have a sensitivity towards poor people's problems, he says. Blacks are number one. But when asked to cite specific ways that he uses his position to help black people, he points to his authorship of a bill passed 4 years ago that made the late Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday a legal holiday in his state. Well, he's to be congratulated for that. There isn't much more I can do, he says. Many of the 4,600 black elected officials in the U.S. share Mr. Vaughn's feeling of helplessness. Now, we just can't afford helpless leaders feeling helpless. You know, I mean, if we're not electing these people to feel helpless. And you remember when Nolandy Young sat down there with a bunch of people and they all sat around the table and cried a few years back, reminiscing about their old civil rights days and carrying on and shedding tears? We can't afford this kind of relationship, ladies and gentlemen, this kind of leadership anymore. The circumstances we are in are too dire to have a leadership caught up in itself in this way. And it goes on, they know the symbolic value of their leadership positions. It's about time for us to get over this as well. But they also know it hasn't gone far toward improving the lives of their constituencies. Problems don't go away when you elect a black, says Harold Washington, a black Illinois state senator for Chicago at that time. Even the most powerful black leaders can't change very much. Well, you know, what is power if it can't bring change? The two almost seems a contradiction there. But we do have a lot of powerful black leaders who don't, you know, not doing anything there. And when they do win elections to important posts such as congressional seats and big city mayoralities, it usually is in places where urban decay is so far advanced that any real progress toward reversing it seems all but impossible. We can see that. After the defeat of Reagan, unfortunately, I think our leadership will become more intense in doing the same things that failed us to begin with. Often we've said that people who are sick choose sick solutions to try to solve their problems. And we have to be very careful of that. You see, it means that in order to solve our problem, we often have to stand outside of ourselves and make sure that the neuroses created by our problem isn't also the neurosis that generates the solution. Because, of course, ultimately it just maintains us in the same situation. And often then what we'll find is many leaders are going to do the same things that have been shown to fail in the past. Here's a piece in last Sunday's New York Times, November 18. Liberals accused of lagging on civil rights, it says. The passion of the civil rights movement has waned because liberals, and we're here dealing here with white liberals, I'm sure, have tired of the battle for democracy and appear willing to accept the mediocrity of the status quo. The psychologist Dr. Kenneth B. Clark said yesterday at a conference marking the 20th anniversary of the enactment of the Civil Rights Act. So it is white liberals who are responsible for the situation we're in today, isn't it? He goes on to say, white liberals seem to feel they have gone far enough in promoting equal rights, and blacks who have benefited from the act are less concerned with continuing the struggle than in becoming indistinguishable from their white corporate brethren. You see again here, a good reading of Black Power USA could have warned us of this issue. Of course, a good reading of the destruction of black civilization could have warned us of this issue. A good reading of just the history of black people in the United States and in Africa and across the world could have warned us of this situation. That liberals, white liberals, are not the people upon whom you place your confidence as far as your liberation. And that whites ultimately betray our people at some point. A study of Indian history would have taught us that. But yet we still have leadership that looks at this kind of coalitioning as being the ultimate value for maintaining it. Mr. Greenberg, the man that headed the National Association of Colored People's Legal Defense, said that he hoped the tailspin of the civil rights movement would be reversed as a new group that would emerge from the chrysalis to propel this struggle forward. He's talking about a new group of white students marching out of the universities, I think, there, riding buses down south there. The results of the presidential election, however, made it doubtful whether young voters are willing to assume that challenge, said Mitchell Myers, Associate Director in NAACP. So then we can see that the standard black leadership and those that inform that black leadership have run out of means to deal with our problems. And it means then that the black community itself has to develop its own leadership and its own new leadership. Right. It means then that the black masses will have to develop this grassroots leadership and develop other kinds of community organizations to solve our own problems. What are my recommendations in part for this kind of situation? Of course, the change of black leadership I've seen. I mentioned in our last lecture that we should found or at least set up a black nation within a nation. I think the problems that face us now are of such a nature until it requires a national coordination and development and a national organization of the people. It involves a program that will require essentially a national structure in its legislative levels, in its economic levels and structures, in its economic levels, as we said, in its educational levels, in its relating to other African nations and countries. It becomes very important for those of us who are black nationalists to read the current economic history and to read the current economic situation. I think we as nationalists are going to have to do a lot of reevaluating, because to a good extent the world now is becoming what we call a global village. There's been changes in terms of who is manufacturing. We know a lot of the manufacturing now is going on in South America, Central America, the Asian countries, that these are the countries now that are going to move into the forefront in terms of manufacture, leaving out many of the African countries as far as development is concerned. We know now, of course, that this is an information age. I was listening to a man the other day talking about Canada, telling those people there that if you're number 2, you're not in the race. And talking about how information is going to change the nature of the world and of the society itself, and how the processing of information and who's in control of that processing is going to influence the economic well-being. How the smokestacks are going to the Central, South American, and Asian countries. He was telling the Canadians they may as well get used to maybe 25% unemployment as a permanent situation in their country. And how then, in a sense, unemployment would be a permanent feature of the society as a whole. I've often said that we as black people predict what's coming. You see, and it's ultimately going to get, because ultimately, you see, this system niggerizes its own people. It goes through us first, but it eventually gets to them as it works its way up. And so then there's going to be a general situation involved there. It means then that in some way, we as a people will have to organize this nation and coordinate ourselves as a nation and build economic distribution networks. It means then that we must capture control of our community economy. We must take the economy back from the Asians, from the other people who have taken over the economic interests of our community. And I'm saying this aware that certainly this is not going to solve all our problems, but we need all we can get, and we definitely need our own money. And why not get it? I saw that yesterday in Big Red. It says black spending power, $30,333,259,900 of spendable income within New York City, Newark, Jersey City, Nassau, and Suffolk County. Where is all that money? I never see any of it. And of course, now, of course, they project beyond 1985 that the black consumer market will be over $225 billion. That is a very, very large market, ladies and gentlemen. This kind of market here is larger than many countries. The 9th or 10th richest nation on this earth. It means then that black people are not near as poor as we have made ourselves perceive, as we have perceived ourselves to be. That the major problem, one of the major problems within our community is a very maldistribution of money, a misallocation of the money we have available to us. And unfortunately, you see, the kind of leadership we've had has not dedicated itself to trying to deal with this distribution of income within the black community. And when you look at the situation here, then what is happening is it's not that we don't have the money as much, is that we are not using the money appropriately to advance our own interests. With this kind of spending power, we could do a great deal. But because we have not appropriately organized our communities, because we've fallen victim to individualistic philosophy, because we've fallen victim to individualistic capitalism, because we've fallen victim to consumerism, unthinking types of consumerism, we, with the wealth that we have available to ourselves, live as poor people and operate as poor people. Now, to a good extent then, in order to get that money, we have to gain economic control of our community. Because to a good extent, the black community is similar to a black third world country. And the economic dynamics are quite similar. You have a great inflow of money, but the money that is inflowing is not stopped and dammed up in the community and made to circle around in the community so that it can be used by people in that community before it flows out the other end. And of course, what is happening, the money is divested from the community by white landlords, by merchants and other people who don't belong to the community, by professionals who work in the community but who don't live in the community, you see, by the fact that we don't own our real estate in the community. That means then that the money is taken right out of the community, and we are supporting other communities. We're in a situation of where you can't go to your own banks in your own neighborhoods to borrow money for your own economic and social development and for your own real estate development. And that same money is being used to build highways to suburbs, is being used to support other countries, not even African countries. It's being used then for every purpose but to advance the interests of our people as such. It means then that we will have to get our hands on that money. As an example, in 1970, $852.7 million flowed into Bedford-Stuyvesant alone. 641 million of those dollars just flowed right out of the other end. Often, as Reagan says, when he was telling the truth, as sometimes conservatives tend to do, our dollars are not circulating once within the black community. And not circulating once, of course, we can't hire our teenagers. We can't hire our other people. We can't help to house our own people. That means then that we as black nationalists and we as the black people, in order to salvage ourselves politically and psychologically as well as economically, it is imperative that we gain economic control of our communities. We must do it. It also means, and I know this is going to go against the grain of some of you nationalists here, but we're going to have to invest, of course, cautiously within the general economy, you see. And now we don't have time to deal with it today, but in our Wednesday night session, we discussed for a while the relationships of our people to the system. And it's very important that you determine what relationship you have to the system, because many people use the concept and they haven't worked it out clearly, and it paralyzes them in terms of their economic behavior. There are some of you who are afraid to go into business because that represents capitalist exploitation, and therefore you'd rather that the Asians and the other people suck our peoples and our blood dry. and the money that we should be using to advance our own people is taken from us because you're caught up into some ideological trap. And then there are the other of you socialists who are dreaming of some classless society that's going to come in the world someday. And therefore, you don't want to engage in any type of business activity or developmental activity. And some of you I've seen even get angry when you see black people engaged in any kind of business. And I don't see such anger with whites, but when a black person tries to go in, I've seen you almost bust a gut. I've seen people almost bust a gut when they saw Elijah Muhammad and other people trying to establish some kind of economic development. Those socialists who listen to socialistic white professors while their brothers were raping and robbing the world, you see, and getting carried away there. New York City, the majority of people are in New York City are black and Hispanics. There's no reason why we cannot own businesses downtown as well. How people work down there. How people spend money down there. If you owned a business down there and ran it to white people, would think you were running it for white people anyway. so take advantage of it. Use it. We can move in deeper into this economy. Why not invest in Con Ed? Why not have some input in it economically? Not just in a beggary fashion. Why not invest in it so that you can get somebody on that board? And when you talk about hiring, you can talk about it from a position of strength rather than merely from a position of dependency as such. You may not like the system, but you're not going to escape it at this point. And none of the hardly any of you are getting ready to move back to Africa, not a significant number of you. So this idea that they're hanging back and waiting around is not going to get it. We're going to have to work with it. And in working, that doesn't mean we support it. We're going to have to work with it, though, but in working with it, change it, you see, and use it. And, of course, with the first thing, though, we have to concern ourselves with, we have to maintain the biological, the real basic meat and potato survival of our people. And we cannot let those people suffer while we sit around in sterile ideological debates. One thing even black nationalists get into is what I call these bourgeois solutions. And these bourgeois approaches, where we well-fed people come to places like this and, do an abstract intellectual rundown of the problems without becoming actively and deeply involved in changing the solution. And we black nationalists are great intellectual critics. And we're great at figuring out all the nuances of racial discrimination and all of that. But that is not going to get it. That's not going to solve the problem, ladies and gentlemen. We have to move now beyond that age. And many of us are caught up then into thinking that all we have to do is just give out information. And all we have to do is write newsletters and go on radio shows and lament and talk. And, and all we have to do is just study history. You see, that's not going to get it. You're not going to have to feed and employ our people with lectures and with newsletters and with meetings on Egyptology and on slave history and all this other stuff. You're going to have to get down to the gritty, the nitty-gritty, and do the actual hands-on dirty work. We must build concrete institutions. As I've often complained, I am tired of coming into these churches and these other places with janitors flicking lights on and off. And tired of being in situations where the problems that we have to deal with, we are made to deal with them within a 2-hour time stop situation. The kinds of problems that confront our people require long and prolonged planning and thinking and administration. And they require some tiring hours of work at times. And they cannot be neatly packaged in little 2-hour segments and half-hour segments and these other kinds of things. You have to have some control over your own space. And you have to have a place where you can look. And I'm not going to believe that you are serious about bringing revolutionary change if I see you in this building 2 and 3 years from now still talking this kind of stuff. If I don't see any new buildings going up, and some major administrative offices and classrooms and things that are necessary to bring about change, I know that we're just bullshitting here. There is no substitute for work, man, ladies and gentlemen. There's just no substitute for it. People are not going to eat these lessons in Egyptology. They have to eat real food. And they're not going to just eat these lessons in history and these lessons of pride. There must be real meat and potatoes. There must be real concrete control of things in the world. And if you're talking about building a national change, you're going to have a national White House, a Black House, so that it can work. Because you've got to train your leaders. When we talk about leaders, these new leaders will have to be trained. And it's a situation of where we're going to have to have a place where sometimes they will have to undergo hours of training. Marathon training as a part of developing their character. Psychological training to weed out the weakies and the insincere. Deep analytical training in propaganda, training in subversion, training in community relations and diplomacy, training in economics. It is, what do you think white universities and colleges are about? They are the institutions by which the leadership and the people that manage the society are developed. And therefore, if you do not have similar institutions, then you're kidding about bringing about change. You're not going to bring about change without these kind of institutions. And so therefore, a lot of this money now that flows through this organization, and I know a lot of it flows through here, can be used to establish these institutions. Because when we educate these 200 or 300 black leaders and people who will then go out in the community and educate hundreds or more, if we have our philosophy correct and we've thought out our strategy, we can gain and assume control over the black national community as a whole. And assuming control over this black community in America, we can begin to impact and influence on what goes on in that black community in the world. It is the black African community in America that is the key community to the liberation of black people everywhere. The whites, of course, have known it for a long time. And it's time that we realize it. And it's time for us to stop excusing ourselves, stop laying the whole thing on racism, which has become a defense mechanism for too many of our people. Stop digging up all kinds of complaints and reasons why you can't do anything, and get into the doing of those things. We have to build our training institutes all over this country and send our people and leaders and groups into these various areas so that the ideology and philosophies and the necessary structuring of the black nation can take place and move forward. We have to then look at things such as our venture capital that is available, and we look at our churches as being available to provide venture capital to the development of our community. In fact, I just mentioned one little thing, and I know we're running out of time, but some of you are familiar with the church in Queens there, Allen AME Church, which is quite instructive there. In the last 8 years, the church has completed with federal assistance, and I know some of that turns some of you off, but take the money, man, and use it. What did Lenin say? If it houses your people and the federal government pays for it, put them in there. You know, a lot of us get caught up in ideology again, you see. And as Lenin said, you know, the capitalists will sell you the rope with which to hang them. And believe me, when the Russian ICBMs come over here and blast this country, they will be guided by IBM computers. That's right. The Russians are aware of their technological lag. And they do not let their ideology get in the way of stealing and buying, or by whatever means they can, to get this U.S. technology. And because they know where they want to go and what to do with it, it's not going to contaminate them to get it. They're going to get it. They're not scared to come over here and even buy the grain to feed their people with. And they still are saying, we're going to bury you and we're out to get you. And so the idea here then is, don't get so ideologically pure until you just end up doing nothing. And if your ideology is right and your head is right, and you died in the world, and you rub your shoulders with white people, you're not going to get any chalk on you. You'll be all right. The Japanese came in and got the knowledge and information. The Russians get the knowledge and information. The Jews, the Israelites get the knowledge and information. Other nations get the knowledge and information. There's no reason why we, all sorts of people, cannot get the knowledge, the information, and the kind of money necessary to advance our interests. So $11 million they used to house for the elderly. They purchased 10 dilapidated stores for rehabilitation, and it cost $250,000. Provided subsidies of $2,500 to dozens of individual homeowners, and without any government aid, built a $3.8 million elementary school. In that time, the membership of the church at Merrick Boulevard, at the southern part of Jamaica section, has doubled to 3,200 members, and the church's annual budget has quadrupled to more than $1 million. Now you think again here, in fact I think I read, over here, where the church, across the Merrick Boulevard from the church, from the school, is a row of shabby storefronts that have been used by drug pushers and illegal numbers operations. According to Mr. Flake, the pastor of the church bought the property and plans to rehabilitate it with a $100,000 grant from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Get the money, use the money. And the idea here is, what if this could happen with a number of black churches and a number of black institutions, you see? Then we can begin to bring some change in this kind of system. The black church is very vital. Why not a development of a black economic development bank as a part of our development as a people? An economic network across the nation. Perhaps, and it is merely a suggestion, we have to study it, perhaps if we had a national network of retail and other service industries across the country, we could begin to build even productive units. That is, units that actually produce products that could then be sold in these communities as such. In other words, by building an economic network, perhaps we can really lay the basis then for a manufacturing network as well. Perhaps through the social cooperative ownership of housing, we could reduce the cost of housing to our people so that even on a lower salary, they can still make a very decent living, you see. And perhaps then we can even undercut and compete with European counterparts and other people around the world because we can produce at a competitive price. You see, we just have to begin to think and use our minds and turn our minds loose. We can get involved, of course, in export industries. There's no need why African products should not move through our hands as a people. If the Italian products and other European products can move through European hands on both sides of the shore, why can't African products then move through the hands of African people on both sides of the shore? This then would involve the building of school systems and, of course, the economic relationships. And unfortunately, given the nature of our economic and social development now, and given the dire situation as far as the employment of our people are concerned, I know we hate to use the word, but we may have to engage in some more kind of, I don't know, we shouldn't call it affirmative action, but we got to deal with this issue of our people being unemployed and thrown out in some way or other. Now, I know that's hard sometimes for black nationalists to cope with, because we have an ambivalent relationship to working for Europeans, and that's understandable. But at the same time, we're going to have to work out something in terms of maintaining a higher employment rate for our people. We cannot sit by, again, on our ideological backsides and not do something about this situation. Now, if it involves in some active burning down of places, locking in administrators or doing something, then we may have to just get engaged in doing it. We cannot afford the luxury to sit down, because ultimately it's going to reach us too. Because we work in this system as well, and our jobs are in this system as well, regardless as to our orientation. So of course then we're going to have to develop then our mental resources. The ultimate thing here, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to run this future world is the creativity of the people. It's a mind game now. It's definitely a mind game. No back games, no working in factory games. The factories are going out and closing down. No emotional games. It's pure mind against mind. It's the Japanese mind against the American mind. And it's the European mind against the American mind. And it's who wins that mind war. Who's going to win and survive in this world. And this is no less applies to us as a people. We're going to have to wake up. We're going to have to start studying. We're going to have to start pursuing knowledge. We're going to have to move beyond the European as a thinker and the Japanese as a thinker. You're going to have to turn this thinking into concrete reality, turn it into concrete products and concrete organization. We can no longer afford a teeny group of people playing abstract games and conceptual games one with the other. Thinking must become a major part of our culture. So consequently, we're going to have to face the economic realities and deal with them. Let me just then conclude this with a little something I scribbled here yesterday, when I thought, of course, that the idea was that we must engage in real active action. The battle must be joined. No nation, no civilization has come to the fore without organization, without thinking new thoughts, without working, actually doing, without being willing to take a chance, a risk, and to risk all, without a willingness to go against overwhelming odds, without a determination to be the best, to be superior, without a desire to determine its destiny and that of others, without a willingness to fight, to spill blood, to risk defeat. For the battle must be joined. It must be fought. Be it the battles of mind, the mind wars, the battle of spirit, the battles of will, battles of bucks. Be it then any kind of battle, a battle of iron and steel, shell and bomb, of tank and plane, of rocket and satellite, Star Wars, of technology, of information. The battle must be fought. The gauntlet thrown down, the chip knocked from the bully's shoulder, the line stepped over, and the clash and clang of steel made loud, and the curses and the moans of pain rise up to the heavens. The battle must be joined, fought in the street, from door to door, in the classroom, in the boardroom, in the bedroom, in the war room. The battle must be ultimately won in the field. Hand-to-hand combat must commence. It matters not if you can eruditely delineate the subtleties and nuances of racism and racial discrimination, if you can delicately dissect with a master surgeon's skill the anatomy of race and the body politic, if you can tease out the tiniest thread that runs through racist discrimination, if you can paint the most beautiful dream on canvas and write the greatest vision on parchment, or ride in your time machine and visit ancient black kingdoms, cities, and empires, or feel the pain and degradation of slavery, or celebrate all we have given to the world, or point with great exclamation out the white devil. It matters not how well you do all these things, ladies and gentlemen. The challenge must still be taken up. Fire must fight fire. Institutions, traditions, habits, and hopes must be uprooted, raised, and put to the torch. No stone left unturned. And institutions, traditions, habits, hopes must be restored. They must be rebuilt or built anew. Bricks stacked in place. New songs must be sang, new voices must carry the tune. New feet must march to new drum beats, new hands and new banners, and standards must be raised. Those songs must be your songs and the voices your voices, the feet your feet. The hands must be at the ends of your arms. The soul unsold to the devil must be your soul. Amen. Thank you.